Everyone inherits something. Money, property, memories. But for Dr. Aris Thorne, the inheritance was a prison grown from soil and sorrow, nestled deep in the heart of the Pacific Northwest. This is not just a story of a haunted house, but of a haunted man and the things that feed on what haunts him. Listen, if you dare, to the tale of the Whispering Vines of Blackwood. The envelope was thick, expensive, and utterly unwelcome. Dr. Aris Thorne sat in the sterile white glow of his university laboratory, the scent of ethanol and damp petri dishes, a familiar comfort. Outside the rain-streaked window, Seattle was a smear of gray and neon, a world he understood, one of quantifiable data and predictable chemical reactions. The letter was from a law firm in a place called Cedar Rig, a name that sounded like something from a folk tale. It informed him, in cold, legal prose, that his grandaunt Eleanor Vance, a woman he recalled only as a stern face in a faded childhood photograph, had passed away. He had inherited her entire estate, a property known as Blackwood. Aris let out a weary sigh, pushing his glasses up to rub the bridge of his nose. The last thing he needed, while still navigating the raw, jagged grief of his sister, Maya's recent death, was a distraction. Maya, the thought of her was a physical pain, a hollow ache beneath his ribs. Their last conversation had been a fight, a stupid, pointless argument about him missing a family dinner because of his research. He had told her he was too busy, his voice sharp with stress. She had hung up on him. An hour later, her car had skidded off a range-licked highway. The guilt was a constant, gnawing companion. He saw the inheritance as a bureaucratic knot to be untangled, a property to be sold off quickly from a distance, but something, a faint, inexplicable pull of curiosity, or perhaps the desperate need for any escape from the city that now echoed with Maya's absence, made him decide to go. He packed a single bag, loaded his SUV with his botanical field key to habit he couldn't break, and began the drive east, leaving the city's logic behind for the brooding, mistreated expanse of the Washington wilderness. The transition was stark. The urban sprawl melted away, replaced by towering, ancient evergreens that formed a dense, dark wall on either side of the winding road. The air grew heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying pine needles. The GP's signal began to flicker and die just as a hand-painted, weathered sign announced, Cedar Ridge, 5 miles. It felt less like an arrival and more like a crossing into another, older world. Cedar Ridge was less a town and more a stubborn outpost clinging to the edge of the immense forest. A single main street housed a dusty general store, a diner with flickering neon, and a sheriff's office with a wooden star nailed to the door. The air was thick with silence, broken only by the patter of relentless drizzle. Aris pulled into the diner, the bell above the door jangling a lonely announcement. The few patrons, grizzled men in plaid and worn boots, looked up with a unified, unsubtle curiosity. He ordered a coffee that tasted like tar and asked the waitress for directions to Blackwood. A visible chill went through the small room. The friendly chatter died. There was no answer, only the resuming silence. He lay back down, trying to rationalize it. Stress, grief, auditory pareidolia, the brain's tendency to find patterns in random noise. He finally fell into a fitful sleep where he dreamed of Maya. But it wasn't a pleasant dream. He was back in their last argument, watching the hurt flash in her eyes, hearing the sharp tone in his own voice. He woke up, gasping, his face wet with tears. As the gray dawn light filtered into the room, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A single, delicate tendril of the iridescent vine, no thicker than a thread, had crept under his bedroom door overnight. It lay on the dusty floorboards, its tiny leaves seeming to turn towards him as if observing its new occupant. Driven by a mixture of scientific curiosity and a growing, nagging dread, Eris decided his first order of business was the greenhouse. It called to him the way a bizarre specimen always did. The structure was even more impressive up close, a cathedral of glass and intricate black-wrought iron, now being slowly consumed by the very life it was built to house. He had to use considerable force to pry the rusted door open. The air that washed over him was hot, humid, and thick with that same sweet, intoxicating scent, now so powerful it was almost dizzying. The inside was a jungle, plants with bizarre, geometric patterns, flowers that pulsed with slow, rhythmic light, and ferns that seemed to tremble as he passed filled every available space. But the dominant species, the king of this strange kingdom, was the vine. It was the source of the bioluminescence, its main trunk as thick as his thigh, pulsing with a soft, golden glow that illuminated the entire space. In a small, rusted tool chest, he found them. Eleanor Vance's journals. He spent the next several hours devouring them, sitting on a dusty stool as the strange plants watched. The early entries were meticulous, scientific. Specimen 734 exhibits phototropic behavior, unlike any documented species. It seems drawn to emotional resonance, not just light, but the tone shifted over the years. The chorus sang to me today. It showed me a memory of mother, so vivid, so real. The bliss is ... indescribable. The entries became more frantic, more desperate. They are hungry. They feed on the memories. The good ones are gone, used up. Now they only want the pain, the regret. They call it the richest soil. I have given them all my sorrows. What will they feed on when I have nothing left? The final entry was a single, scrawled sentence that made Aris's skin crawl. The gardener becomes the garden. As he read these words, a voice, clear as day and heartbreakingly familiar, spoke from right behind him. You always did have your nose in a book, Aris, even when I was trying to talk to you. It was Maya's voice, laced with the same sad reproach from his dream, a spoon around the journal falling from his hands. There she was, standing between two large ferns, looking just as she had the last time he saw her, wearing her favorite blue sweater, her hair slightly messy. She was solid, real. "Maya," he whispered, his voice cracking. You can't be here." She took a step closer. "But I am. This is a place where things that are lost can be found again. Don't you want me to be found, Aris? Don't you want to tell me you're sorry? He reached out a trembling hand, and for a single, heart-stopping second, he felt the rough knit of her sweater. Then his fingers passed through, and the image dissolved into a shower of golden motes of light, like pollen caught in the sun. He was alone. He wasn't being haunted. He was being farmed. The next few days blurred into a nightmare of escalating horror. The vines were no longer subtle. They grew at an alarming, visible rate, thickening on the walls, pushing through cracks in the window frames, their faint hum now a constant, low thrum in the air that vibrated in his teeth. The sheriff paid another visit, his face grim as he took in Aris's disheveled appearance, the dark circles under his eyes. "You look like hell, son." "Seen any more ghosts?" Aris, his scientific worldview in shambles, confessed everything: the whispers, the journal, the manifestation of his sister. Sheriff Miller listened patiently, his expression one of grim validation. "I told you." Eleanor said the same things. Near the end, she was just a shell, sitting in that greenhouse, smiling at nothing. She didn't eat, didn't sleep, just ... sat. We had to force our way in to check on her. She didn't even know who we were. She just kept whispering about the feast. "Whatever is out here, it doesn't let go. You need to leave now." But it was too late. That evening, Aris decided he had to get out. He packed his essentials in a frantic hurry, his heart pounding with a primal fear. He jumped into his EV, turned the key, and sped down the driveway. But the driveway, a straight shot that should have taken 2 minutes, went on and on. The same gnarled oak tree, the same bend in the road, flashed past his window again and again. He was driving in a circle. He slammed on the brakes, sweat pouring down his face. He got out and looked back the way he came. His tire tracks formed a perfect, dizzying loop in the mud. The vines had manipulated his perception, turning the simple path into an inescapable labyrinth. He was trapped. He ran back to the house, fumbling for his phone. No signal. He grabbed the old landline phone in the hallway. The line was dead. When he pulled the cord, he saw why. The copper wires were completely encased in a thick, fibrous sheath of the vine, which pulsed faintly as he touched it. Panic truly set in then. This was his life now. He was a specimen in a jar, a crop to be harvested until he was as hollowed out as Eleanor Vance. Despair was a luxury he couldn't afford. Aris Thorne was a man of logic, and if logic had failed to explain this, it would now have to be his weapon. He retreated to the study, barricading the door with a heavy bookcase as best he could. He would fight this thing with the only tools he had: the scientific method and Eleanor's research. He set up a makeshift lab, using chemicals from his field kit and reagents he found in a locked cabinet in the greenhouse, potent fertilizers, pesticides, and strange, unlabeled powders Eleanor had concocted. He took clippings from the vines. Under his microscope, the cellular structure was bizarre, unlike any plant cell he'd ever seen. It seemed to have neural-like pathways. He analyzed the air in the greenhouse with a portable gas chromatograph. The results were terrifying. The vines were releasing a sophisticated aerosolized cocktail of psychoactive compounds, a potent mix of hallucinogen, memory-enhancing agents, and empathy-mimicking chemicals that bonded with receptors in the human brain. It was a targeted, psychotropic weapon. The chorus was a hive mind, a vast, subterranean network of roots and mycelium, with the greenhouse as its central processing unit, its brain. To kill the parasite, he had to destroy the brain. He spent the next 24 hours in a frenzy of work, ignoring the whispers that now came constantly, ignoring the phantom images of Maya that flickered at the edge of his vision, using Eleanor's notes on plant sensitivities and his own knowledge of chemistry. He concocted a brutally potent, hyper-concentrated herbicide. It was a viscous, dark liquid that smoked slightly in its beaker. It was his scalpel, his axe, his only hope. The final journey to the greenhouse was a war of attrition. The forest itself seemed to be alive and hostile. Vines lashed out from the undergrowth like whips, trying to trip him, wrap around his ankles, and tear the heavy container of herbicide from his hands. The air was thick with the shimmering pollen, and the hallucinations were relentless. He saw his parents, Long the seer said, waving at him from the porch, their faces smiling but their eyes vacant. He saw Sheriff Miller lying on the path, his body tangled in thorns, warning him to turn back. But the worst was Maya. She appeared before the greenhouse door, not as a sad memory, but as the vibrant, loving sister he remembered from their childhood. Eris, stop this! You're destroying our home. We can be a family again here, forever. No more goodbyes, no more guilt. Just stay with me. Please. Her voice was a perfect symphony of everything he had lost and everything he longed for. It was the most exquisite torture the vines had devised yet. For a moment he faltered, the weight of his grief almost crushing his resolve. The image of Maya held out her hand. But then he saw Ita, faint, iridescent tendril, like a puppeteer's string, trailing from the back of her neck and disappearing into the greenhouse. It was all a lie, a beautiful, terrible lie. Tears streamed down his face, but his voice was firm. You're not my sister. It shook out. My sister is gone, and I will mourn her for the rest of my life. But you are a disease. And I am the cure. He pushed through the illusion, which shattered into a million glowing fragments. He burst into the greenhouse. The central root mass, the heart of the chorus, was a monstrous, pulsating knot of fleshy, wood-like material, throbbing with violent golden light. It knew he was there. The entire structure shook as he uncorked the container. He poured the entire contents of the corrosive herbicide onto the heart of the vine. The effect was instantaneous and cataclysmic, a deafening, psychic shriek, composed of 1,000 voices. Maes, his own, and countless others he didn't recognize erupted inside his skull. The light in the vines flared into a blinding, painful intensity, and then began to die, fading from gold to orange, to a sickly gray. The vines themselves writhed and withered, their leaves turning black and crumbling to dust. The oppressive weight that had hung over Blackwood for decades suddenly lifted. The air felt clean, cold, and empty for the first time. Exhausted, bleeding from a dozen small cuts, and emotionally shattered, Eris Thorne stumbled out of the dead greenhouse and into the weak morning sun. He made it to his car. This time, the driveway was just a driveway. He drove straight to the main road and didn't look back. He checked into a cheap motel on the outskirts of Cedar Ridge, the normalcy of the scratchy sheets and the hum of the ice machine feeling like a miracle. He slept for almost 18 hours straight. Sheriff Miller found him there the next day, bringing a hot meal. The relief on the older man's face was evident. "Looks like you did it, son. The whole forest looks ... different. Lighter. Whatever was there, it's gone." Eris felt a profound, weary sense of victory. He had won. He had used his intellect to defeat a primal, supernatural horror. He had faced his deepest grief and not broken. He spent a week in that motel room, decompressing, making plans to have the Blackwood property cleared and sold. He would return to Seattle, to his lab, to his life. The nightmare was over. On his last night in Cedar Ridge, he was packing his bag when he felt a persistent, itchy sensation on his left forearm. He scratched at it absently, but the itch deepened. Looking closer under the harsh bathroom light, he saw a small, raised bump, like an insect bite. Puzzled, he pressed it. A faint, familiar, golden-green light pulsed just beneath his skin. His blood ran cold. He squeezed the bump, and a tiny, thread-like tendril, no longer than an eyelash, slick with a clear fluid, emerged from the pore and wriggled for a second before retracting back inside him. He hadn't escaped. He had simply taken a piece of the chorus with him. The hive mind was wounded, but not dead. It had planted a seed, a scout, inside its new, mobile host. He was no longer the gardener, and he was no longer the crop. He was the soil, the vessel, and the carrier. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning, and it was leaving the forest, heading back to the city, carried within the heart of the man who thought he had destroyed it. He stood there, staring at his own reflection in the motel mirror, a silent scream dying in his throat, knowing that the whispers would soon start again, from the inside this time. And so, the Vines of Blackwood found a new way to survive, not in a place, but in a person. A reminder that some inheritances are not so easily refused, and that the most terrifying prisons are not made of stone and vine, but of memory and flesh. Sleep well.